it's to your natural impulse to chase more and more and more and more and more. That's why a lot of us do that, right? But logically, we know, well, there's a life that we want to live, right? So I think that even though technical people like to say things like, "Oh, well, I'm logically making this decision," or I'm logically doing this, what we know about humans is that we make an emotional decision and then we use logic to justify it.
Welcome to the Real Freedom Podcast with your host, Ryan Weimer. Today, I've got my friend and a very special guest, Paul Sparks, with us. Paul, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ryan. How are you?
Doing amazing. So Paul's the owner and founder and operator of Whale Club, Bunny Hill Properties, and Bunny Hill Builds. So for those of you that don't know, Whale Club is a collaborative nationwide mastermind of 100 plus elite real estate professionals. I should know, I'm a member. And the whole thing is about growing wealth and living life on your terms, and getting closer to what you really want in life instead of just always pushing for more. So we're going to deep dive into that a lot in this episode. Paul also does quite a few investment properties flips through Bunny Hills Properties, and then also has recently gotten into some of these bigger deals in development through Bunny Hills Builds. So very excited to unwrap all that stuff. We can go a million different directions on this episode, but as with every episode, we start off, Paul, with what is your most beautiful failure?
Well, it's so funny to hear you talk about Whale Club and Bunny Hill because I'm like, I have this weird habit of naming all of my companies after animals for some reason. I don't know where that came from, but I don't know. But anyways, yeah, man, it's a pleasure to be here. And you start off with the biggest failure. Again, that's like quite a way to start the conversation off. And it's like if you've been in real estate for a while, like the one thing that comes to your mind like immediately when you ask that question. And I don't even need to prepare. I know exactly what it is. It's a 6-figure loss that I took on a fix and flip, and everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. This was when I started flipping back in 2020. I had kind of almost like a fear of, well, can I do this on my own? Can I really do this on my own? And so I've noticed that I have a tendency to do this. I don't know if anybody's listening has a tendency to partner because you're scared, because you're worried, like maybe you don't have what it takes or you can't figure it out along the way. So oftentimes you partner. Well, I made that mistake. And it was from this smooth talking dude from Texas with a big long beard who was like, yeah, I flipped a 1,000 homes in my lifetime, Paul. I did this in Texas for 10, 15 years. I've been in Colorado for, a couple years. And that was pretty much all I needed to hear. Like, I was just so eager to get going in this. And somebody had, told me, oh, you got to talk to this guy. I won't use his name. Told me everything I wanted to hear. We get into the project. And of course, I structured that deal terribly from the get-go. It was like, all right, cool. I'll bring all the money. I'll put the loan in my name and you do all the work and cover all of the overages out of your pocket and we'll split the profits at the other end. Like, and again, you hear bigger pockets and all these podcasts of people saying like, well, they did that and it was successful. And I was like, well, I'll try it. And of course, the devil's in the details. And so imagine this guy just didn't do what he said he was going to do. It was supposed to be $100,000 rehab, which included digging a basement down. I'd done a 2 pop tops prior to that. So I was like, oh, I can do this. Again, if you don't know what a pop top is, it requires digging a basement down. Let's just say that. So I'm like, well, I've done this before with other people. I can do this again. It was 6 months like that. Almost nothing happened in the project. But of course, enough happened where they left the job site like crazy. The neighbors got pissed. They called the city. We got red tagged. We spent a year trying to get our actual permits because the guy didn't pull any permits, was just kind of doing it like a cowboy. And then, of course, he ran out of money. So the project it literally took 2.5 years to sell one fix and flip. We took I think it was like $160,000 loss on that deal. Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. When I took the project over, eventually, Ryan, the house was drywalled up. And there was no ducting in the house, like no heat, no nothing, no ducting. I was like, how are you going to heat the house? And the guy was like, oh, we were just going to deal with it after we got through the final inspection. I'm like, This is the level of, and again, it's all my fault, honestly, because I was constantly chasing more. How do I do more flips? How do I scale my business? I was trying to wholesale, trying to flip houses. I was trying to do developments. I was trying to start, this community mastermind whale club. And it's like, I've learned it's not a really good idea to try to build three businesses at once. It's not a good idea to just chase, because, you know, this deal it should not have been anywhere near as hard as I made it. It's just that I wasn't paying attention. I was trying to do everything, trying to scale as fast as I could, trying to keep up with everybody else that I knew. And meanwhile, I was like literally putting myself into the ground with this deal. So yeah, that's my worst deal. And I can talk about it now. It caused a lot of pain for a long time.
Man, that's rough. First of all, I've been there. On a future episode, I'm going to talk about one of these 12 unit multifamily builds I have, and basically a carbon copy of what you went through there. When was that? What year was that?
Oh man, we literally just sold this in December. Like literally just
Wow.
got it in December. So I bought it in July of 2021. We had it for 2.5 years. And like, here's the thing is I the money was one thing. Why that deal was so bad is the stress that it caused on my life and in my marriage. My wife and I, we've been married for 2.5 years. We literally got married like a month after I bought this house. So like we didn't even know what it was like to be married without this massive thorn in my side, gushing out almost $6,000 a month in a hard money loan. That's just there's no end in sight, and you can't see an end because I didn't even have the capital to finish the project even if I wanted to, because I put it out on all these other projects. So um I don't think that people talk about, oh, I lost 100 grand on this, and oh, I lost this, that, and the other. What they don't talk about is the gray hairs that I have now. It's like they don't talk about the stress on your marriage when you're starting to build a family or these other things. And again, it just goes back to what I know eventually we're going to drive to with this. It's like, what do you actually want out of life? And what are you willing to sacrifice to get it? Again, working hard and doing well in business is like certainly what we're all interested in. We want to make money. But the question is what are the costs to scaling without really considering the trade-offs to the other areas of your life? And I think there's an appropriate way to move and grow. We should always be looking to grow and expand, but it's like, but we have to consider these other things. And one of those is the stress that it causes on your ability to sleep at night and your spouse's ability to sleep at night.
Yeah, that is spot on. And guys, for those of you that haven't listened to Steve and Paul talk on Certainty Talks podcast, you need to, because I remember when I started listening to it, it really changed just the fabric of how I thought about things. And it was the foundational piece of how I look at making decisions in the future. Because I think the problem with this, Paul, is like fundamentally, if you're not on social media talking about how many hundreds of deals that you do, or you walk into one of these masterminds and you're not doing 100+ deals a year or whatever, it's always like the first question that people ask you, how many deals a year are you doing? As if playing a volume game is the measure of success. And so what you're doing with Certainty Talks and Whale Club is we're flipping that on its head, right? And you're saying that's not the right way to do things. Ask me how I know. Look at these scars, right? And everybody in the room is like, I have scars too. Like maybe we should be thinking about this differently.
Yeah. We have a phrase that we say, it's all about getting closer versus chasing more and more and more. And that can be fairly confusing at first because some people are like, well, don't you have to get more sometimes to get closer to what you want? And it's like, yeah. But let me also throw in like a really nerdy reference because you and I are both engineers, right? So I'll ask this question, like, do you know the difference between speed and velocity? You're an engineer. Do you know the difference?
Yes, of course.
So speed is a rate, right? It's just like saying how fast are you going. Velocity is what we call a vector. It means that it's a direction. You're headed in a certain direction at a certain speed, right? So again, what's taught to it, what's sold to us is what I should say. It's not taught to us. It's like they're saying one thing, but then they're pressing the button inside of our brains that just wants dopamine. We just want to chase more and more and more and more and more. Buy this course, scale, 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 scale your brains out. This is what we're sold. And of course, and most of us, we need more money to hit the goals that we want to get to. But I think it's more about how do we get closer to the life that we actually want to live? Because certainly money is a big part of that. But I do think that most of us that play this game, that go into entrepreneurship, we do it because there's things that are also important to us, right? And that makes total sense. None of this is anything new. We're all fully aware of this. But what happens is, because we're human, because we're wired towards chasing more and more and more, oftentimes we make decisions without even realizing that we're sabotaging ourselves, that we're actually just chasing more and getting further away from the things that we want. And so it's not about knowing this stuff. This is all stuff that, again, if you've listened to podcasts and you've read books and like you've educated yourself, you're listening to Ryan's show, this isn't new information. I have a coach that says the biggest risk to a room full of smart people is saying things like, yeah, I already know that. Right? Because it's not that you don't know, it's that you don't do. And even the best, the highest achievers, even the people who are scaling their businesses and growing these things, there's other things that also matter. And so it's like getting clarity on what do you actually want out of your life, and how do we build a system that's designed to get us closer to that without just constantly chasing more and more and more.
Dude, so I got a burning question, not to use a horrible pun. This analogy when you're a kid, right, and your parents say the stove is hot, don't touch it. What do you do as a kid? You got to touch it. Of course, right? I think that going back to the engineer thing, I'm curious your thoughts. Do you feel like that the fact that we have, like, an engineer tends to have a logic-based thought process can almost doom you into taking on more because you're just a natural problem solver, right? Like, that's what you do as an engineer, and like, I'll just figure it out later. How do we combat those initial thoughts of like, I can handle this?
So let me just, again, everyone's going to realize how big fat of a nerd I am before the end of the show, but let's talk about like biology for a second. Regardless of, the science, what the science says is that our brains have evolved over time. And, thousands and hundreds of thousands of years ago, when we were surviving, we had a survival brain, right? It was very much fear avoidance. Like, how do I not get eaten by this tiger? And how do I make sure that I eat today, right? It was like always, you had to chase more. It was this fight or flight type response. Over time, our brain developed, and we kind of developed. There's a guy that wrote a book called, Thinking Fast and Slow. His name's Daniel Kahneman, Dr. Daniel Kahneman. He describes what he calls System 1 versus System 2 brain. And you might just think of this as like your emotional brain and your logical brain. And here's what all the science says. Everything goes through the survival emotional brain first. Doesn't matter how logical you are, doesn't matter that you're an engineer. Literally, it's why you're able to jerk the wheel out of the way when you're driving through an intersection, someone's about to T-bone you. You don't have time to logically process that. It's there to protect you, right? That fear avoidance is what allowed us to survive to this point. But it's not a recipe for playing to your full potential and being able to make deliberate choices, even though it may be against your natural instincts or impulses. It's to your natural impulse to chase more and more and more and more and more. That's why a lot of us do that, right? But logically, we know, well, there's a life that we want to live, right? So I think that even though technical people like to say things like, oh, well, I'm logically making this decision, or I'm logically doing this, what we know about humans is that we make an emotional decision and then we use logic to justify it, right? So I do think that at the end of the day, in order to get to the things that you want in life, it's understanding both of these sides of our brain. It's understanding that at one side, there's this like survival side of us that's just hardwired a certain way. We're hardwired towards fear avoidance. And even back to my reference with partnerships, it's why a lot of us are so eager to try the next thing. Like, Let me scale my business. Why? Because we fear of being left behind, fear of missing out, fear of like, if I don't take this opportunity now, maybe I won't get another one in the future. This is all the stuff that drives us to behave a certain way. But when you take a step back and you're like, hey, man, live in abundance mindset, and like, there'll always be an opportunity. Logically, we get that. But
Yeah.
that's not what our brain causes us to do. We react a lot of times. And so, again, I think that it's important to spend, people are trying to spend more time like logically, like, tell me the hack, or like, what do I need to do? Give me just, Ryan, just tell me what I need to say to this seller so I can buy this house, so I can make all this money and all these things. And it's like, well, I think there's some deeper work that needs to be done there to understand, first of all, what do you actually want out of life? Because otherwise we just start doing stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I'm curious. I think to some extent, trying things is good because it teaches us more about what we don't want than what we really want.
Yeah.
What is like a more productive framework for somebody to, like, somebody sitting there that's like, I think I want all this stuff. I think I want more and more and more, because it seems like that's what everybody else wants. But like, if I sit down and think about it and I be really honest and critical with myself, I don't really know what I want. And I want something in the future, but then let's be honest, I'm probably just going to up that goal once I get there, and like forever until
Sure.
something happens to me, right? What's step one? Like, how do I, if I really don't know what I want, what should I do?
I have the perfect framework for this, and you're going to love this. So, all right, I keep this book by me at all times. Start with Why, Simon Sinek. And although I think this is a very good book and very applicable to what he's talking about in here, he's not wrong. But I disagree that we should all be starting with why when it comes to like, what's your why? What's your purpose? What do you want? That's a very loaded and highly anxiety inducing question,
Yes.
right? It causes us to like not either one of two things. Fear keeps us from starting, that's analysis paralysis. That's fear based. Fear also causes us to go all in and burn the boats because we're so desperate to get where we want to go. I'm not a fan of that either. So I don't believe we should start with why. And there's a guy who I was fortunate to be mentored under. This was a guy who was actually the former senior advisor to Bill Gates in the 2000s. I got to work with this guy for 6 months. He has a framework, and he actually says frequency, intensity, purpose. I changed it to like repetition, intensity, purpose. Because here's the thing: is most people are trying to start with their purpose. Like, what is my purpose in life? What do I actually want? But that's not really how it's done. It's done by doing the reps. And I have another coach who calls this a soft offense. And maybe this is best illustrated with like my favorite analogy for this is let's think about it playing Jenga. If you were to play Jenga, how do you play? You'd be a really bad player if you just picked out one of those blocks with your eyes and you went over and just mashed at it. That's not how you play Jenga. You go and you lightly tap on the blocks, you find the one that's loose and you pull that one. So the idea here is when you're trying to find your way forward, again, everyone's so concerned about speed. They want to go really fast. And what I'm saying is, let's make sure we're going in the right direction first, and then we can go fast. So a good soft offense where you're lightly pressing on different opportunities and different paths forward to see which one gives. You're not going all in until you have the information. And you know what everyone's going to tell you? You can't focus. You really can't focus. And it's like telling that to somebody who's been in the business for less than 5 years is so damaging. It's so damaging because here's the thing. You don't know what you don't know yet. How do you know
Yeah.
what the best path forward is? How do you know which block is loose until you tap on them? You got to find the loose block. So go do the reps. If you're starting in real estate, and anyone who's less than 5 years in the business is still starting. That's why I'm still continuing to change my path, because I'm finding looser blocks. I'm finding a better path forward, and I'm holding it all as like, I'm not burning the boats on anything. Why would you do that? Until
Yeah.
you
So I,
know you're headed in the right direction, don't burn the boats, right? Do the reps. That'll lead to intensity. You'll find where there's an intensity there, and then that will ultimately lead you to your purpose.
I love that. That's so actionable too. Like, I think people sit there and question themselves, and what you talked about with just starting with why, the like the amount of overwhelming anxiety that people feel when they try to, what's my purpose, what's my passion in life, abort, right? Like eject, not going to go through that exercise because it's just way too much all at once, and so they just keep kind of wandering aimlessly through life. um
Sure.
I wonder, what would you say, like, if future Paul could see what he experienced with this big loss as a flip? Do you think that there was a way that Paul could have ended up in this position and have this amount of clarity and framework and tools without having that experience, or do you think it was necessary?
Like, this is just do as I say, not as I do, like easy to say. Like, this is where the work begins. And in fact, this was kind of it was like a sore spot for me for a while because, I've got this community where I'm teaching all these things that it's not new information. It's like we already all know this stuff. And here am I sitting up here talking about all this stuff and meanwhile violating it constantly in our life, in my life, right? So there's just such a big gap between knowing and, we all know how, quote, how to get wealthy. We all know how to have six-pack abs. We all know how to do these things. It's not like knowing is the answer. It's this other side of us, this emotional side, these biases, the humanness of us that contributes to why we don't get what we want, even though we logically might know how to go about doing it.
Absolutely love that. Oh man, you got the wheels turning now. Because every time that we talk, I feel like I'm forced to go a layer deeper in my own status quo behavior and day. And it's challenging to like stop and think about, do I need to really like course correct even daily sometimes?
Mhm.
And this is why this is so applicable to the entrepreneur, right? Because naturally we want to dominate and we want to compete and we want to win. And we have shiny object syndrome. And finding the right way to maneuver that is daunting sometimes. What do you feel like, and maybe we could go through this exercise to help the audience in this process that you've gone through? What have you defined as success for you, and how is that changing decisions you're making on a daily basis?
Great question. So, here's the thing, I'm really big on frameworks, tools, principles, things that I can draw on because, I have this Rolodex in my head now where I'm like, there's things that I know to be true. So I think through these frameworks, and this is a really powerful one. Because you asked me, how do you define success? There's a lot of different similar things, but this is what I use. It's a framework. It's actually an acronym. A timer is the acronym. So these are the different currencies that exist. And I'm sure that there's a lot of other ones, but I use this to kind of articulate it. So A stands for attention. Right? If you're listening to this right now, you're paying. I mean, maybe you're not. Maybe you're at the gym and you're not paying attention. But there's a certain level of attention that we pay to things all day. Pay attention to social media. You're paying attention to your wife and your kids, or your spouse, or the members of your team, or maybe it's that like contractor that's calling you, and now you got to pay attention to this or whatever. So A, attention. T, time. That's an easy one. Most of us, we define success, a lot of us, by like how much time do we have to spend doing the things that we want to do. That's a definition of success. Then you have I, which stands for impact or influence. A lot of us are doing what we're doing because we want to influence future generations in our family. We want to build legacy wealth, or maybe we want to impact our team and help them grow and to be the best performers and people that they can be, or it's your community. Or again, a lot of us get paid in that currency of the impact that we make on people's lives. Of course, then you have money. That's an easy one. I love what Jim Rohn says about this. He's like, the thing about money, the reason we start there is because you can count it. It's like, it's easy to count. And all of us need money in our lives. There's a member of our group, Tom, who says, money's like water. If you don't have it, it's pretty much all you can think about, right? You're just thirsty all the time. And you're constantly in this perpetual state of like, I need more money. If you don't have a consistent flow of it, it's like water. You need that. The E is energy. So I think of this as like the things that you do throughout the day that just suck the life out of you. You all know, if you're listening to this, you know what those things are. There's other things that just light you up. Your health is your energy. It's like, health and fitness. And I describe it like that. The last one being R is relationships. I think relationships is a measure of success personally. So when I think about success, it's a moving target, right? It's like it's constantly evolving. I think that's the misnomer is let me just define what I want so I can be happy and successful. I forget who said it like this. I think it was a guy named Dr. Trevor Kashey. He's a big nutritionist. And he says, saying I want to be happy is like saying I want to eat once and for all. You don't just eat once and for all. Happiness is a constant thing that's constantly moving. The target is constantly shifting. So really what I do when I define that word, that how do you define success, is by thinking through what currencies do I want more of now. For me, it's about relationships. Like I do what I do in business and life because I enjoy spending time with the people that I like. So like, success for me is almost like playing this game of business like a sport. It's what I liked about basketball and baseball growing up. It was, my buddies and the sleepovers and going to the Mexican restaurant after the game and running around and traveling. And like that was what it was for me. It's still why I do business today. And that's how success is defined, is like I think through those different currencies and I say, well, what do I want in these different areas? And that's how I define it.
Love it. Hopefully that Mexican restaurant was Mi Casita, since you're a Denver guy.
La Paria, man. That was La Paria. I grew up in Atlanta, so.
Okay, gotcha. When did you move to Denver?
Oh, gosh. I was one of those kids that was like, I'm moving west. I graduated college in 2013, packed my car up. I knew nobody in Colorado. I moved out there, and lo and behold, so did everyone else that lived in Denver. You thought you were super unique, like, leaving home, driving all the way out to Colorado, and I get there and literally everybody else did the same thing. So, yeah, 2013.
Gotcha. Okay. So what sparked the interest of Whale Club and seeing the need for this in the industry? Because I think as I look at this as a whole, like the product fit is pretty spot on. Like you're essentially going and challenging this common thing of more and going against the grain a little bit and saying, hold on, let's optimize,
Yeah.
And I'm sure your experience of this flip and some challenges in real estate caused you to see a need here. But maybe you could talk a little bit about the story of the formation of Whale Club and how it went
Sure.
down.
Well, I almost blew myself up. That's kind of how it happened. And, without getting too deep into the details, I met a guy who at the time was talking about business and life in a way that I just really hadn't heard. It was, like you said, very against the grain. Everything I had learned was how many doors do you have and how big are you scaling? How many deals do you do per month? It was just this, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but like it was basically blowing me up. Like when you're maxing and you're white knuckling constantly in your business, like there's only so much you can take. And I think I was getting to the point where I'm like, I'm going to blow up here. I met this guy, Dan Nicholson. Dan had this operating system he was talking about. It's a long story of how we met, but to keep it fairly short, it's like he started mentoring me. I mentioned this other guy named Randy, the guy that was the senior advisor to Bill Gates. He was advising Dan for like a decade. And I met these two because they were starting to teach this program to entrepreneurs. I paid a lot of money to get around these guys because I was just so eager to hear more of the way they thought and processed business. It was all about how do we do what we want to do with the least amount of effort and risk? Forget about scale. How do we optimize for the life that we want to live? Like that's ultimately, I think, what we all want. So he taught me this operating system. I actually got certified in it. And I went out and used it. I used it to like actually build my business. And I had to, man, it's so difficult when you realize that because we get attached to the decisions we make, we get attached to the businesses that we make, and I had to unwind a lot of like 2 or 3 years of bad, I wouldn't say bad decisions, but I had to unwind a lot of stuff. I had to do the work myself. So I was like the poster boy for what could be done inside of real estate. And I said, Dan, there's a lot of people in this business that struggle with the same things that I do. In fact, this is like the same time when I reached out to Steve Trang because I was like, hey, speaking of that, I don't really have a platform. Steve and I partnered up because he had the reach into that market to give me kind of my opportunity to share that message. That's like, hey, look, you don't have to scale your brains out to be happy. In fact, that's probably not going to make you happy. You probably want to just get closer to the life you want to live. And the reason why you can't is because you haven't addressed the underlying biases that you have here. You're constantly chasing more and more and more. And why is that? So, we just started helping other real estate investors realize this. And it started with 10 people and it grew to 30 and then it grew to 100. And now we're continuing to expand this and continuing to expand our reach. We've got 115 members at this point, you being one of them. And really it's not talking or teaching anything that most of us don't already know. It's just giving language to things. Like, for example, a timer or closer over more or repetition, intensity, and purpose. And like, we have our own language and our own tools and frameworks that we use. And you kind of have to have that if you want to avoid continuing to make the mistakes that get us further from the things that we want. It's helpful to have people who speak the same language. It's helpful to have these tools and frameworks because it's really easy to just revert back to your natural instincts and tendencies, which again, don't always serve us. We're not surviving on the plains anymore. Those instincts were there to keep us safe, but now it's not really a recipe to play at your full potential and to live like as a champion, as we like to say.
Yeah. And Paul, before Whale Club, was a high sales producer, right? You were closing big time deals. And then, if I remember your story right, and maybe you can elaborate, you got into wholesaling in Denver and started doing the scaling thing and got to a certain point and you were like, fuck this. Like,
Yeah.
what in the world is going on? Maybe you could talk about that transition.
Yeah, man. Well, so I am an engineer, as I've mentioned a couple times. Here's the thing is like, I was never a good engineer. Actually, I barely, I think I graduated with a 2.97, like barely, average. But here's the thing is like, I could speak the language. Like I understood the technical side of things that led me into a technical sales career. So I spent like almost 9 years working my way through manufacturing, eventually into like, so I saw everything in manufacturing: medical, automotive, food and packaging, aerospace. Like we were selling, I mean, now we call it AI. Back then we called it machine learning. It was basically, I was selling equipment to like inspect a product for defects or inspect a package to make sure that the right label is on there and that it's not damaged or this, that, and the other. And eventually, yeah, like you said, I used that to build a pretty successful career in the B2B capital sales, 5, 10, 15, $20 million type deals with companies like United Airlines, Amazon, Walmart. These are my clients. And when you spend 2 years on a justifying, building a business case with a United Airlines, they don't just, it's not like buying their house in, 2 weeks. They don't just sign and like, here you go. They spend years building these really complicated business cases. And then COVID hit and it completely crushed all the projects that we were doing with them. So like I was sort of forced, my hand was forced a little bit. Luckily I had been buying real estate. I probably could have sat there and played the victim, but I said, you know what, let's just like, this is our opportunity. turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me because I'm here where I am now. And but boy, the transition from sitting in a boardroom with a vice president at a major corporation and then, sitting in a room in a hoarder house with a little old lady who, you know, it's like that is a completely massive shift. And I don't
Yeah.
care how skilled you are in sales, like that's just a completely different sale. So, the honest truth was like I said to myself, well, shoot, I've done sales my entire career. I see all these guys online flashing these checks, 50K, 100K. You're telling me you can send a freaking text to a homeowner? They'll text you back. You can go over their house and talk to them. You can buy their house, quote, buy their house and then sell it to somebody else. I was enamored by that. And I got caught, that somebody sold me something because my brain was like, ooh, I could do this. Of course, here's what I learned, Ryan, and you probably know this. So I say it like this: when you're dealing with distressed people all day, it's stressful. It's stressful. And
100%. Yep.
to be honest, I just saw that as a path to make money, but I didn't really consider the fact is, well, if you want to be successful as a wholesaler, you pretty much have to have a team. Like you can do it solo, but I think there's a minimum amount of you got to have a CRM. You got to have people that typically work for you. I'd never managed anyone in my life. I mean, my boss back in the day couldn't get me to ever put anything in the CRM because that's just not how I am. I'm like, how about you just check the bank account at the end of the year? If I don't hit it, then you can pay me less, but I'm not putting stuff in a CRM. I hated that stuff. So why did I build that business? Well, because I saw other people do it. And it's like, that's what got me into trouble is watching what everybody else was doing instead of playing my game. So I do think I had to go through that evolution to really recognize that, hey, maybe spending $40,000 a month and having 7 people that work for you and actually not selling because I was really more like managing. I was
Right.
managing systems and doing all these things. Like I literally took myself out of what I did best just so I could be like, look at me, I'm Mr. CEO and I do X number of deals per year and I this, that, and the other. And it's like, oh my God, I was so caught up in vanity metrics. It's not even funny. And eventually you just blow up. Like eventually you just say, you throw your hands in the air. You're like, I can't do this anymore. And that's ultimately what happened to me.
Thank you for sharing that story. I think that's super relatable. I, for one, got into real estate for financial freedom, not really realizing that as soon as I bring on members to the team, all of a sudden I'm really just a sales and marketing company, right?
Yeah.
And it has very little to do with real estate.
Yeah.
And what you're saying is so true. Like the clientele that we deal with in this space, you have to find people with problems, right? And when you have people with problems, and sometimes the problems are years or decades old, you get all the baggage that comes along with that. And I don't care who you talk to, but that will have an effect on you, and you will take that home with you to your family, to your spouse. And it's a lot. This is not for the faint of heart, for sure. I love that you're one of the few people that are giving people permission to say, guys, this doesn't make any sense. Everybody's got to figure it out on their own, but you're giving people permission to look at it from a different angle and stop and think.
There's a million ways to make money in real estate, and we all know this. But what we end up doing is getting forced into this like box because what most of us want is like, give me the 10-step plan so that I can just go do it. I don't really have to think. I'll just go do it. And then I'll be successful and I'll be happy. It's like, it took me a while to realize this. And I'm still learning it. So I don't mean to sit here and pretend like I know it all. I'm suggesting that like, that's just not true. That is one thing that I know to be true. Following a 10-step plan is never going to lead you to the life that you want to live unless you just get really, really lucky that it just so happened to be the exact fit for your personality and your skill sets and strengths. And ultimately, I think it's about understanding what your game is. Who are you? Like I'm a big believer. Like we are one of one. Like we're the only one like us in all of existence ever. There's a certain uniqueness about every single one of us. And if we can really tap into that and understand what makes us unique, what makes us tick, and what's going to ultimately create the success that we want, you can't go asking around and seeking consensus for that. Again, the people that are there to give the advice, that have there's nothing wrong with courses, there's nothing wrong with mentors or masterminds or any of this stuff. I'm a member of all of it and I've done all of it. But I do think there's a huge amount of personal responsibility that still has to come with that. If you're just walking into this and you're expecting, you say, hey, you've been successful. Tell me what I should do. What should I do? I mean, they might have the best of intentions and they're telling you what they would do if in their case. But here's the thing. I'm not a big fan of seeking consensus. And here's why. Because at best, you're going to get highly generalized advice. Here's what you should do. Work hard. Oh, well, you ask a wholesaler what you should do. They're going to tell you should reach out and do direct to seller stuff. You ask a developer what you should do and they'll tell you should develop. And it's like, it's because most people don't want to do the deep work to really understand who they are, what their strengths are, and what their game is. Because when you understand that, now we can start playing Jenga. Now we know what a loose block looks like and feels like because it's aligned with our skill sets and our strengths. It's like, here's the thing. I was great for 10 years at building business cases. I was great at B2B sales and making, it sounds a lot like raising money, doesn't it? Right? So here's what I learned is I've just got to stop doing what everybody else is doing. Stop listening to what everyone else is telling me, even though they have great intentions. They don't know my skill set. They don't know me at a deep level. I barely know me at a deep level. I'm still learning this, right? So again, it was like, you have permission to just lean into what you do. Somebody eventually gave me that permission. And I'm here to give it to everybody else. It's like, what I did really well was really just raise money. I started aligning with that inside of real estate. I said, okay, what I don't do well is manage people. What I don't do well is manage systems. Even though I'm a freaking engineer, systems and processes, I hate them. Hate them. Like, that's like pulling teeth with me.
Yeah.
I do everything I do, Ryan, to this day off of a notebook. And the reason why is because that's just my style. It's not really right or wrong. And it wouldn't work for most people. But that's the best way for me to do what I need to do. And I've put together large multi-million-dollar development deals. I do these lots of flips. I mean, the things that I'm doing now, there's a lot of people, they scratch their head and they're like, well, you shouldn't do it that way. You should do it a different way. And it's like, well, again, this is what's making me successful, is giving myself permission to play the game the way I want it played. And that, the rules, I'm setting my own rules in my own business. And again, we all have permission to do that. So I think it's like, it's a coming to Jesus moment a little bit. You have to be able to say, even though I've started this business, even though I've been doing this thing for some amount of time, is it actually getting me closer to the life that I want to live? Because it's really easy to just stay in situations that aren't serving us anymore just because they're comfortable and they're familiar.
Absolutely. So earlier when I was thinking about our podcast and our talk here, I had something come up in my head that really grinds my gears, and I want to get your take on it. Why in the world, in the entrepreneur space, do people brag about how little they sleep? It's like, I only need to sleep 5 hours a night. I'm like, bro, there's no way that you are at your highest potential capacity to make proper decisions and achieve your optimal output in a day if you are sleeping 5 hours a day. I know this is a random side tangent, but I think it's important because these vanity metrics, since when is sleeping less a vanity metric? I think it just falls into the I'm going to outwork everybody, and that's the way that's what I tell myself so that I feel better about really having this lack of what I want.
Well, I think it's perfectly relevant. And, I'm coming to realize that a lot of the things that cause us to do what you just said, like I sleep this many hours a night or this, that, and the other, it's all fear-based. Okay. It's all rooted back to that that old brain, that emotional side of our brain that was there to keep us safe. We need that fight or flight, that fear based response. It's what causes us to compare ourselves to others. Like ultimately, humans, we want to be part of the tribe. Like we want to be accepted. And, like I'm a recovering people pleaser. I mean, that's like that's my biggest thing is I compare myself constantly to other people. I want people to tell me that I'm good. I want people to, it's like, we all have some version that it manifests, but it's all fear based, right? It all kind of manifests itself slightly differently. For this person, it's a comparison thing. It's like they want to state this because they want to show that, well, again, I don't know exactly why this person is doing that or saying that, but when I hear things like that, I think fear. Like this person is worried that someone's going to think that they're not good or they're not worthy or they're not doing enough. A lot of that's how I see it in a lot of men is like they white knuckle, they push, 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 push because they want to be and feel productive. They're fearful of how they'll be seen is like, so they just grind harder and harder and harder and harder because it's all fear based. And so, yeah, I just think that most of the things that the fears, the biases, the things that cause us to sabotage ourselves, like it ultimately comes back to like, you're afraid of something. You're afraid of getting left behind. You're afraid of not living up to your potential. You're afraid of what someone else might think. And although those things, they feel very real, it's just your brain playing tricks on you, right? It's not necessarily reality.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Let's talk about the practical application of all of these things and what you're in sales, you're closing deals, COVID happens, you start a wholesaling business, realize it's not really for you, it's chaos, do a couple bad deals somewhere in the middle. How has applying this framework gotten you into recently, like this townhome development deal you're working on, and really applying on what is that sweet spot for Paul?
Can I use another nerd framework that I love here?
Oh,
There's
yeah.
something that's called system reliability. So when you think of the word reliable, what I think of is like that I get the outcome that I expect. That's why we like rental properties because they're reliable, which means that you typically get the outcome that you expect, right? This person, $2,000 mortgage, this person's paying me three. I can expect at a high degree that I'm going to make about $1,000 a month. Of course, there's lots of other things in there, but that's what I mean by reliable. Well, most of us want that in our life. We want a reliable source of income. And when you think about all the things that we do, like we have rental properties, and then we're trying to flip houses, and then we're trying to do wholesaling, and then we're trying to raise money, and then we're trying to do developments, like we're doing all these things. And so what system reliability, when you look up like the equation to calculate this, it's essentially the sum of the reliability of all the components. So it's the product. So if you have a 90% reliable rental business and you have a 90% reliable wholesaling business, the total system reliability is zero point 0.9 times zero point 0.9, which is 0.81. So it goes down, right? Now let's say we add another thing. Now we're going to start flipping houses and we do that at 90%. Well, the system reliability now becomes 0.9 times 0.9 times 0.9, which is 0.73. Goes down again. So 73% of the time, you're actually going to get the output that you want. So again, most of us think that by doing more stuff, well, I've got all these businesses, got all these things. But the more things that need to go right, the less likely it all is to go right. So the first thing that you got to do is you got to cut out all the stuff. Like you got to simplify it. And our brain's not wired towards that. It's wired towards more and let's expand and let's add another team member. Let's go into another marketing channel. Let's do this, that, and the other. Well, when you have all these things that now need to go right, the probability of it all going right goes down. That makes sense. But like we sabotage ourselves with this. So the first thing I literally had to do, Ryan, is get rid of all the stuff that I just knew wasn't contributing to the life that I wanted to live, let alone how much money it was making or losing or whatever. It's like, let's get rid of the stuff that like I wouldn't do forever, you know? Um, and I started learning more about what it means to play my game. And that led me down the path of, well, when I look back at where I was successful, where I had the most energy, where I was in flow, it was all in relationship based sales. Like I am like a competitive person. That's what I like about sales. It's fun, it's competitive, it's like something to win. And I don't know why my brain's just wired towards that. But again, it was a lot to do with just giving myself permission to start leaning into that. It's why I went really hard at Whale Club, because it's all relationship based. That business lights me up. It lights me up, dude. Like, I get to play business like a sport with people like you and people who get it, right? We're establishing this language. We're talking about the things that actually matter. And then we're going out and playing business together. So I leaned into that because that block was loose. I'm like, whoa, I've never felt a block like that. That one is
Yeah.
loose. Let's pull that one. Then we
Yeah.
started leaning on the developments. That one's loose too. So it's back to this idea of when you're trying to find the path forward, it's okay to do the soft offense thing. Lightly press on different options, find the ones that are loose, and go with that. It's not a magic bullet. It's like that's the thing is most of us just want the hack. Just tell me what I need to do. And it's like, well, I unfortunately the process is the shortcut. Like that is the shortcut. You have to go through the process, you know?
Yeah.
So what worked for me, I can almost guarantee won't work for anybody else. But the process of learning about yourself, who are you? How do you play this game? And we have all these tools and frameworks and principles and things that we teach people so that they can learn about those things. They can really understand themselves at a deep level. What's influencing the decisions that you're making? What's causing you to do the things that you're doing? If we understand that, then we can start aligning better with our natural true strengths. That starts to, again, repetition leads to intensity, leads to purpose. Most people try to invert that. They try to just decide, well, I'm a wholesaler. It's like, have you done the reps yet? Well, no. Okay, well then I wouldn't do that because it's going to get really hard to like get off of that. If you found a more efficient path forward, probably won't even be able to see it.
Well, I think that that's spot on. And I think you, this is about recognizing and discovering what your flow state is, right?
Yeah.
I think it's really hard to find that without failing and without this concept of repetition like you're talking about. And eventually that led to you starting Whale Club and you doing relationship based business, right? And that's exactly why you're in a partnership on this townhome development project. What, for the listeners, what is that all about? How is that going? What have you learned through that?
I've learned that investing and playing business at the next level. Okay, so like level 1 in business is about saying yes. Like you have to do the things that Ryan's saying. You have to do it. You have to say yes. You use the word fail. I don't have any problem with that word, but I do think that people hear that and naturally like they just don't like the word failure. But it's
Yeah.
not failure. It's like, do you really if you're playing Jenga, come on, and you tap on a block that's not loose, is that failure? No, it's not. You're trying to find the right path forward and you have to say yes. But the next level of business is about learning how to say no. And so, first of all, it was about saying no to trying to do it all yourself. This is a team sport. So I was very caught up in like, well, I'm going to be a developer. I'm going to do these things. Eventually, what I realized is actually in every big deal, there's always three sides to every single deal. And you've probably noticed this. One is the sourcing side. How do you find the deal? Second is the funding. How do you fund this thing? Debt, equity. There's lots of people oftentimes that play on that side, just like on the sourcing side. The last side is the operations. Like, how do you build the thing? How do you do the thing? And you kind of have to have all three sides in order to put a deal together. What I started realizing is I don't add any value really to the operational side. I don't know how to develop anything. Never done that before. The really place where I add value is on the funding side, and the sourcing side potentially. Well, I found two guys that didn't know how to fund very well, didn't know how to raise capital. Maybe they could, they definitely could if they spent the time to do those things, but that's not their lane. That's
Yeah.
not their side, you know? And in fact, because they've been in this business for so long, they already have a lot of deal flow that comes to them. They just didn't have the 3 million bucks to take down this deal. So that was the real big next aha click, was like, this is a team sport. Really what you're looking for is to put together the right team. And here's the big difference that I learned about, you know, uh, when I was wholesaling, it's almost like I was the coach, you know, and the rest of the team was playing. That's not my style. Like, I was the scorer. I was the varsity basketball captain. I want the ball in my hands. I'm going to take the shot, you know? And I like, now when I play business, I'm looking for, how do I put the deal together? How do I raise the money? But like, ultimately I want those guys to run the project. So we found a nice little groove, but I'm also exploring these other relationships. I mean, you and I have talked about deals up in Idaho together. You know, so again, I think it's like, there's a million ways to do real estate. And until you slow down to understand, well, what do you do really well? Everything seems like an option, you know? Everything seems like an option, but everything's not a great option. It's
Yeah.
just, they're all valid ways to make money, but they're not necessarily all valid ways that lead you to play at your full potential. And that's what we're ultimately looking for. And that's what I'm still in the process of trying to find for myself. It's like getting closer to this inevitable constant moving target of playing at my full potential. What does that look like? I don't think I'm ever going to get there. It's the difference between like an infinite game and a finite game. Um, and so I love the business of playing business like a sport. I love thinking about it like that. And I don't think that the intention is to like win some game, like, woohoo, now we won and we're happy. And it's like, you know, just like this analogy, like, I'm going to eat once and for all. No, that's not how eating works. That's not how happiness works. Like, it's a game to be played, not because you're trying to win, but the play in and of itself is the reward.
That is, guys, listen, if you're listening to this, rewind that last 30 seconds and listen to that again multiple times, because I think you're going to get some mind melting uh, outcomes from that. Like, the point of that is to challenge your conventional thought process and what everybody around you might be saying, or what your entire feed on social media might be telling you, right? And I think this is exactly why being in a community, this is why Paul created this community called Whale Club, is it's like, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, number one. Number two, if you don't have any support in this and you're out on an island, it gets really difficult and you start to question what you're doing. And in order to really get the real fruit of this thought process, and this, because this will change everything that you think you knew and thought, and it is a process. You might be listening to this like I did when I listened to a couple of Paul and Steve's first episodes, and I got slapped across the face. It took me some time, a couple of weeks, to really sit down and be like, whoa, I'm not thinking about this right. Like, I really need to sit down and ask myself those hard questions. But it didn't happen right away, right? This is where, like, Jimmy Vreeland always talks about the CG slap, the collective genius slap, when you're at the mastermind and like the second presenter is up and just something blows your mind and you're like, crap, I have completely overlooked that. But this is not something tactically that you can afford to overlook. This is your one and only life that we're talking about here, and the decisions that you're making and the relationships, all the currencies, different currencies that you're using or not using, like Paul's talking about. If you don't have direction in that, you're wasting years of your life. Like, not to be dramatic, but like, truthfully, you are robbing yourself of living life on your terms at the most optimal, happy, fulfilled level that you can live it at. So that's not a plug for Whale Club in any way. I'm just sharing my own personal experience. When I listened to that framework, it was a slap across the face and there was a shock factor involved.
Same here, man. we have a quote that's from Dan, and he says, "The biggest risk we face is not getting what we want out of life." Like, how'd you like that to get to the end of your road and you just didn't get what you wanted out of all this? That's the biggest risk that we face. And so, there's a certain level of give yourself permission to change your mind as well. If you're doing something and there's also so this is why it's really important to read the terrain, not to just accept random platitudes and phrases that people say on social media, like never give up, and that's not true. There's certain things you should give up on, and like always do your best. It's like, well, that's also not true. There's certain cases where you shouldn't give your full best to everything because you're still trying to explore. It's like, so be very careful making the mistake that I made for a long time, which is just accepting the words and the things that are said to you. Like, it's not true. You can change your mind. It's okay to quit. It's okay to change direction in light of new information that we have. This idea of burn the boats works really well if you're trying to sell somebody something. You want them to go all in. You want them to buy your product because you got to convince them that they got to go all in to get the credit card out and buy the thing. And it's like, there is a time and a place to go all in. I'm not saying just like everything, it depends, right? It depends on the certain situation. Like, it's all contextual. So again, I know a lot of people who are still running businesses that they hate. They're justifying it because they were doing it yesterday, because they spent years building this business, and the loss aversion, it's fear-based, right? So that's really where the process starts, is understanding what are the deep-seated, subconscious, underlying beliefs that are causing you to do the things that you're doing, right? So there's a couple people you can read more about this. There's Dr. Joe Dispenza. There's Dr. Jeff Spencer. There's a whole series on cognitive biases. Like, you can study these things. You can study why humans do what they do. It's behavioral psychology. It's like there's a whole field around it. If we don't really understand that about ourselves, you're kind of just guessing. You're just trying stuff. And most people will avoid doing this hard work because it's just easier to do it the other way. It's just easier to try a bunch of things. And most of us don't want to do that deep work. But I can tell you that if you do that work, the rewards are immense. You'll find yourself in flow. You'll find yourself happier and more successful because you've defined what that means, regardless of what everyone else is telling you. So again, this is just permission. You can quit. You can give up on things that at one point you started, but they don't make sense anymore. You're not a failure for doing that. There are better paths forward, most likely. The question is are you courageous enough to actually do what needs to be done, right? That's my stance on it. And there's also a time to dig in and push through. I'm not saying you should quit when things get hard. I'm just suggesting that in light of all the evidence given, there's probably more people out there that need to stop doing what they're doing because it's not actually getting them closer to what they want.
Absolutely agree. And it just doesn't get talked about very much. That's the thing, because it's not sexy. It's not sexy to change courses. It's not sexy to alter your path, right? And I'm just thinking of if somebody's listening to this and they're like, all right, Paul, Ryan, I get it. I have some thinking to do. I have some deep work to do. Maybe I need to sit down and start thinking about this. What's one actionable step somebody can go 0 to 1 with after listening to this?
Okay, so this is a plug. All right. So if you're listening to this, it's going to cost you like $5 to do what I'm telling you to do right now. So it's not free, but it's about as free as you can pretty much get. Okay. So all the information that I learned from this guy, Dan, that we teach people and real estate investors how to use, how to customize, how to apply to their life, the information is free. There's a Wall Street Journal best-selling book that Dan published that has literally all these tools and frameworks in it. It's called Rigging the Game. You can go to Amazon. You can pay literally $5 and get this book. It will change your life. If you read that book and you like what's inside it and you want to have the support of some of the top investors in the country to help you customize this, to play your game, to build your business around your life and what you actually want. Like I said, the information's free. Read the book. If you want to learn how to implement it and you want to get around other people who are doing that, you can check out realestatecertainty.com. We call what we do the Certainty Operating System. If you're familiar with like EOS or Traction or Profit First or something like this, like these are all operating systems. We have one as well, but it's an operating system for your decision making. Like, how do you make decisions on a daily basis to get you closer to what you want? Go read that book. That's the best actionable advice I can give you. And like I said, it's not free. It'll cost you about $5, but it'll be the best $5 you ever spent.
Absolutely, guys. You can't afford to not look into this and not read that book. At least read the book so you can know that you're on the right path or not, or hey, maybe I need to change course. Don't be like me. Put your ego aside. Don't be like me and waste a year being like, this is too overwhelming. I'm just going to go back into tunnel vision, and maybe like in 6 months or a year, I'll, have the bandwidth to do that. Right. I'm just being vulnerable about some of my own objections to this, right? Of like, I'm too overwhelmed right now. I need to get out of some stuff and apply this or read it or whatever. Don't be like me. Do it now. That's the perfect time to do it, is when you're dealing with so many different things. It'll make your vision and your start to your process that much more clear, and it'll get you to where you want to go in a more direct, easy, fast manner. So that's just sharing my own experience. It's not necessarily a plug, but I love everything that you shared with us, Paul. Where can people find out more about you and Whale Club?
So I try to put it all on my sleeve. I'm a social media guy now. Apparently, what I found is that's actually the best way to get more and more relationships, which happens to be my most valuable currency. That's why I do it. So I pretty much document everything I do, and I think on social media you can find me on Instagram, Paul Sparks Official. Like I said, the best way to learn about what we're doing inside of Whale Club is by picking up a copy of that book, Rigging the Game. That is like our manifesto. That's like the operating system that we are learning how to implement. The information's free. I shouldn't say free. It's a $5 book, right? Whatever. You spend more on a coffee nowadays. So the information is free as far as I'm concerned. If you ever want to learn how to implement that inside of your life and your business, like I said, realestatecertainty.com. You can read about the Whale Club. You can read about some of the experiences of the people that are in there. There's a bunch of resources there too. And that's how you can get in touch with me.
Love it, man. Any last words for the audience that you want to give?
No, but I got to get you your Whale Club hoodie, and you got to get me one of your Weimer Investments hats.
Absolutely, I will. I will definitely. That's right. Absolutely. We'll make it happen, man. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And until next time, peace.